Okay, so last year, lots of people were talking about the new thing that God was doing. And I came, I think it was in February, excuse me, and you were just about to begin a series on Isaiah 43, verse 19, which is that verse that says, "Behold, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it?" Do you all remember that? Not my preach necessarily. I'm not going to question you. You're okay. But or the message puts it like this: be alert, be present. I'm about to do something brand new. It's bursting out. Don't you see it? And we talked about the fact that actually both those statements are true. I am doing a new thing, and I'm about to do a new thing because of the way the Hebrew is. So God was about to do a new thing. And for months, that's what people were talking about. All through last year, you could go almost anywhere and they would be talking about this new thing that God was about to do. But for the last several months, there's been a growing sense that God was on the move, that he really is about to do something new. Have you seen it? People have begun to talk about a great move of the Spirit above and beyond anything that's ever been experienced by the church. A tsunami which will sweep over us, bringing huge change and bringing many to Jesus. A wave of the Spirit which will not be like anything that has happened before. So you can't look back at previous revivals and say, wow, you know, this is going to be bigger and more and different. And I sense it too. God is on the move. Things are shifting. Recently, a friend shared a vision that she had received 15 years ago. And she'd been holding that thing until she felt it was right to share it. And she described how in this vision, she'd been driving along the road and they'd come to a high place and suddenly she could see out to sea. You know those moments in the road where you suddenly think, oh, there's the sea, you know? And she saw the sea, that it was there. But as she looked down the road, there were workmen in the road. And she suddenly realized that out to sea, a tsunami was building, a massive wave, and she could see it moving towards the land. And she sensed that this wave was going to wash away everything that these workmen were doing. It was going to bring, you know, it was just going to all go as the wave came through. I'm not quite sure what happened to her as she drove down the road. That wasn't part of the vision. But you know, as she woke up, she just felt that God was encouraging us to stop, to see what it was that he was doing, that there was a challenge there, not just to be busy with good things, but to actually discern what he was doing at this time. And she concludes this word by saying, in these strange and unique and interesting days that we're living in, I wonder if the Spirit is once again calling us to a heightened sense of discernment, to understand what the Father is doing and not to get caught up in busyness for the sake of busyness. And she says there is something coming that is so much bigger than any of us have ever anticipated. It's okay to look excited at that point, by the way. It's really difficult sort of actually looking at you and I can't hear you at all, you know. So did you know that you've got a little clap button that you can find? Have you ever found your clap button? Okay, so if you thought it, that's it, you see. All right, so you can look excited now because God is on the move. So we've all been talking about this, and then came COVID-19. And this sense of the move is getting stronger. It's building. And if we truly believe it, we need to get ready. As we began to realize that this country was going to be badly affected, I had a sense right at the beginning that we needed to stop. that we needed to hear God, to understand what he was saying in this season. And I had a sense that the church, the nation, would never be the same again. That if we went back to what was before, we'd have missed what God was doing in this season. And as we've gone on through words and messages that I've heard through different places, that sense has increased. A sense that God is on the move and that things are changing. Meanwhile, there's a cry from many that they just want to get back to normal. I was in the supermarket and somebody, I was saying, am I too close? And she said, I don't care. I just want to go back to normal. And people are desperate. They're fed up with this, this whole thing. And yet there are voices that are saying, we can't go back to normal. Because, look at what we're saving in terms of air pollution and all those things. And we're trying to work out what normal will look like in the future as we come through. Later today, we might discover what some of that will look like. Who knows? But for now, normal has gone, and it may never return in the way that we've understood it in the past. Going back to that verse in Isaiah, it's interesting because the bit that comes before the promise of the new thing says this. It says, do not remember the former things. It says, forget them. Nor don't consider the things of old. Forget what has been. I wonder what things you are grieving for at this time, because there is a sense of loss, isn't there, in all of us? I know I feel it. I feel that loss of things that should have been, the things that might have been in this season. But Isaiah is saying, if we want to move on into all that God's got, we have to let those things go. If we constantly want to hanker back to what it is that God was doing, then we will miss what he's going to do in the future. So this morning, I just want to look at a couple of things that God's been speaking to me about through words and things that we've heard and seen. And I just want to encourage you as individuals and as a church to stop and listen and get ready for this great thing that God is going to do, because he's on the move. He's on the move. So if you want to look, but we're going to just think for a moment, just briefly, about Hebrews 12, 1 and 2. I'll just read it. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also, actually, I'll read the version that's on the screen, it'll be less confusing. Let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Thank you. So the first thing is we need to stop, to pause and to listen. And for us, I was just talking to Rosie about it earlier, one of the joys of this season has been time to take life a little more slowly. And we've enjoyed spending lots of time in the garden, and we've done this big project out there, which is great. Our backs tell the story of how much digging we've both done. And we've been out and we've walked across the fields, we've discovered footpaths we didn't know existed, and we've had time to chat to our neighbours as we've sauntered down the street, and we've had time to sit and to read and to pray and just a bit more time. At the beginning of March, I was thinking about it, beginning of March, none of us were even contemplating that all this would happen. And I was supposed to go off to Turkey for a conference with Sheila. Gives a wave. Okay. Who, you know, I was looking forward to getting to know Sheila better. She was going to come and stay the night, and we were going to, you know, talk the night away and then fly off to Turkey for a conference together. And then I was going to come back from that, and I was going to have well, more or less get back on Wednesday, and on Thursday I was going to France for 2 weeks for to help with the 7 Stories course that we do, and that was all mapped out, and suddenly it was all gone. The diary was empty. We found ourselves looking down the barrel at this empty diary, which is very unnerving. You know, no more childcare, no more rushing off to look after the granddaughter, no conferences, nothing, all absolutely cleared out. We suddenly had time. I'm reading at the moment Pete Greig's book, How to Pray. I don't know how many, give me a wave if you've read that book. It's good, isn't it? It's a good book. It's worth a read. And in the book, he tells the story of an occasion when he was in Guildford High Street, and all of a sudden there was a terrible commotion. And he saw fly past him a greyhound pursued by a metal bistro chair. And it would appear that this greyhound had been obviously in a coffee shop, you know, those places we used to go to. He'd been in this coffee shop, and his owner had obviously just tied him to the chair while he got the coffee. And something had spooked this greyhound, and he'd started to move. And there he was, flying down the high street, pursued by a bistro chair, which was attached to his leg. And he said the noise and the fear in the dog's eyes was just amazing, because the faster he ran, the more noise the chair made. Now, all that dog had to do was be stopped. I don't know how you stop a flying greyhound or even grab the chair, but, you know, I mean, Pete Greig says as far as he knows, that dog is still running. I sincerely hope not. And probably at some point, somebody managed to stop the greyhound and remove the chair. But he goes on and he says, actually, we all at times live our lives a lot like that demented greyhound, driven and disorientated by irrational fears, pursued by an entire pack of bloodthirsty bistro chairs, too scared to simply stop. And he says, the master commands us to sit. You think about those words in Psalm 23, he makes me lie down in green pastures where he restores my soul. You can think of Jesus, who just calms the storm and says, stop, peace, be still. Of course, we all find it extremely difficult to obey, which is one of the things we're finding difficult about this season, because suddenly all the frantic activity without any warning stopped, just like that, gone. But we all need time to deal with the bistro chairs. And in this season, God invites us to breathe, just to pause. And in those moments, to listen, to fix our eyes on Jesus, as we just read, to look at him and to feel his gaze, to hear his voice, and just to be for a moment, to have time, actually not to have to be or do or, you know, and I'm with Ingrid. It's delightful to be with you this morning, and it was delightful not to have to drive 60 miles to get there. And I say that without any sense of, you know, of negativity, but there is that thing of just being and having time to sit. And as we pause and we listen to what God is saying and breathe deeply for a moment, God comes and actually he unties the bistro chairs and he removes those things if we let him. Which is the next thing that our passage talks about, because we need to let go of anything that might hold us back. That the passage invites us to run a race. I can't think of anything worse, but you know, people do these things. Some people actually enjoy it. Or you have a son and a daughter-in-law who absolutely love running. Anyone else there like running? Oh, see? What can I say? And you know, when we think about running the race, we think about hard work and endurance and having to keep going. Our son Tom decided last autumn he was going to run his first marathon. The hours of preparation, I mean, he must have run hundreds and hundreds of miles in order to run his 26 in the end. You know, following a program of short runs and long runs and uphills and downhills and fast and slow, and you know, just doing it so that he had the stamina to keep going for his 26 miles. And on the day, he just, you know, he set out without any baggage, nothing. And most people, when they choose to run a race, they don't take a sack of potatoes with them. I know when you get marathons, you do get people doing strange things, don't you? I mean, wasn't there a guy a few years back who decided to run the London Marathon in a diving suit? You know, and then you get people dressed as Big Ben or donkeys or all sorts of things trying to run, but they're always the last to finish because of the weight that they have. This is a season for getting rid of the excess baggage, getting rid of the rubbish, clearing it out, letting God untie those things that hold us back. The same friend who had the prophetic word I mentioned posts regularly on Facebook. And last week she quoted that verse and she went on to say this: Lord, the race is not won by flexing my muscles, but by surrendering those areas of entanglement of my soul, by relinquishing those areas of hurt, by abandoning those memories of pain in order to run with my arms open wide into your embrace. If we're going to be ready to get hold of the things that of the new things that God has, if we're going to be ready to receive this move of the Spirit, to fully engage with it, we need to get rid of those things that hold us back and trip us up. Now, I'm sure we all are aware of things in our lives which have caused us pain and hurt. And this is a season for clearing the ground. As part of our garden project, we've cleared the borders in our garden, which were full of rockery stone. In fact, Martin moved 180 pieces of rockery stone, which are all around the borders of our garden. And actually, we made them into a pile and we got rid of them just before lockdown on Facebook Marketplace. So we were well chuffed, we got some money for those. But yeah, but these huge rocks, which were all around the borders. And the reason being is that I wanted to plant flowers. I like flowers in my garden, not rocks. So the rocks went, and then we tried to dig. And as we dug, we found more rocks. We now have 3 enormous bags of those pebbles you buy in garden centres. You know, the kind of thing, the ones people pay money for. Yeah, 3 huge sacks of them. We have piles of bricks and rubble that Martin has cleared away because we wanted to put some grass in and not have concrete there, you know. And all of this is now stacked up down the side of our house, waiting till a moment when we can get rid of it. And then after we got rid of after all this rubbish from the garden, we managed to get hold of some plants, and you put the spade in and then it goes, ah! And sometimes it's another stone, but actually more often than not, we found roots. Big woody roots where someone's cut down a tree. But Martin found one the other day. It was a huge clump of a root where they'd cut the tree off and just left the root in the ground. And if you're going to plant new stuff, all of that needs to go, because you can't put stuff in where there's all this rubbish in the ground. We live next to a farmer's field, and there's a strip of land between us and the field which is full of nettles and brambles, which is quite good. Martin always points out it's good for security because nobody will want to go through it. But equally, those things have roots which had previously come up and destroyed the fence. We've had to have that replaced as well because it was full of nettles and brambles and ivy. And we've had a wonderful time over the last few weeks when we haven't been careering around the place. Very satisfying. But those roots, actually, I've got a root here I want to show you. Okay, now the thing with nettles is, I don't know if you know about nettles, but when you dig them out, you think they've gone, and then you see a tiny little bit like this, and you think, oh, I'll just pull that out. So I decided to pull one of those out, and this is what was underneath it. Can you see this root? It must be about 3 foot long. Can you see this thing? Yeah, and you just got hold of it and hold of it, because what happens with nettles is they reproduce by putting roots into the ground, and if you don't get the root out, then you just get more and more nettles, because it goes along and up comes a nettle and it goes along and okay. I've now got soil on the carpet, by the way, but there you go, we can clear that later. But the thing is that we need to get those roots out if we're going to plant more ground. We need to get the rocks out if we're going to plant more. We need to get rid of those that pain and that hurt. And I don't mean in my experience it's the same as yours, but in my life, sometimes there's been things that have gone way, way back. And you think you've got it out, and then suddenly something happens and it strikes you again, you know, because that root is still there and suddenly that little nettle appears. And in this season, I've experienced that. I've found that as I've had time, God said, let's go a bit deeper with that and get the root out. Let's deal with that. Because the thing is, those little nettles, those little things that suddenly pop up, that they trip you up, don't they? You know? Somebody says something and you suddenly find that you're angry, or you react badly because that thing has come again and it's opened an old wound. So this is a season for getting rid of whatever, every sin, every weight, every burden, all that stuff, so that the ground is clear, the way is clear for what God wants to do in the future. And I suppose part of that is about allowing ourselves to be shaken. I know at the beginning of this, when our Arise conference in Turkey was cancelled, I just had the sense that we'd got caught up in this shaking, and God was beginning to shake, and things was a result. Things were beginning to fall out, if you know what I mean. When you shake things, they sort of, you know, a bit like sieving, isn't it? And the thing is that God uses difficult things to get us where he wants us to be. Now I need to say this, because COVID-19 is not from God. I'm not saying that. And I would hate you to think that it was. But the interesting thing is that God uses these things in order to speak to us. You know, whenever there's difficult stuff going on in our lives, if we will stop and look at Jesus, then actually we can grow through them and we can be changed. And God has always used difficult things to get his church where he wants her to be. So, I mean, for example, you might think, of the disciples in the book of Acts, we read that a terrible persecution came on the church. Now, what's interesting about that is that before that persecution, the church was only in Jerusalem. And they were having a lovely time, yes, but they'd sort of forgotten a little bit that Jesus had said to go to Jerusalem and Judea and the ends of the earth. They were just having a good time building church in Jerusalem. And then the persecution came, and they all suddenly had to leave. And the gospel began to go across the world because of that persecution. And we get churches popping up all over the place because the disciples have fled. Interestingly, and this is just an aside, the only people who didn't leave Jerusalem were the apostles, which means sent ones, which is a little bit ironic, but I'll leave you with that thought. But they went. And sometimes, it's just the way it is, that God uses this shaking, this difficult thing, to bring about his purposes. So God is shaking. And for the first time in history, we find church buildings closed. Buildings that have stood for hundreds of years as places of solace and prayer are closed. Churches, people unable to meet together. If we're going to be ready for what God wants to do, we need to be willing to let go of some of that stuff. But please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that we need to let go of meeting together. That's not what I'm saying at all. But we need to look and be prepared to let go of some stuff. Now, if you'll allow me to be just a little provocative for a moment. But just imagine this great move of God happens. Streets of families, hundreds, thousands of people around you are coming to know Jesus. The Spirit of God is interrupting people as they're going about their business. It's just extraordinary move of God as the seeds that you've sown begin to produce fruit. Can you imagine that? Thousands and thousands of people. What will you do? Will you panic because you can't get them all in the building? Or will you be ready to embrace new, the new thing that God is doing? Ready to let go of some stuff in order to become what you need to be for this amazing thing that God is about to do. Imagine it. A church on every street. There are parts of this country, where there are Methodist churches in that kind of number, hundreds of them in some areas, or there have been in the past because of those great moves of God that happen. And this is going to be more than that. So we need to stop and listen and get ready for what God is doing. Get rid of anything that will hold us back. Get rid of anything that is not necessary in a way. Clear the round, get rid of the rubbish, and be willing to go where God is leading. Amen.